When I was 11, I got really sick. My parents took me to the doctor like any concerned parents would, and the doctor wasn't too concerned, just thought it was viral, no big deal. Gave me an antibiotic anyway, like everybody did. And he did note that there was a lump in my neck. The next day we could see it. It took a month and a half of specialists not knowing what was going on, nothing getting better, trying a whole bunch of different drug regimens. And finally my mom took me to a surgeon who agreed to take it out. The day after the surgery, the doctor came in to the room and he told us that I had lymphoma. I didn't know what that meant, but I read his body language and the way he said it and the way my parents reacted, and I knew that I was in trouble, that this was not a good thing. I started crying and just holding on to my parents. And I spent the rest of that summer going through chemo. Being so physically weak, I couldn't get out of bed most days. This one time I was in the pharmacy with my mom, picking up one of the medicines I needed to take. And she stopped to talk with one of her acquaintances that she had seen there before. And she was telling her about my having cancer. And my mom told me that this was a pastor's wife, which perked up my attention. I had never grown up in the church. My parents only took me for Easter and Christmas generally. I didn't have any faith really, but I had a lot of questions at that point. I didn't know why I was going through what I was going through, and I wanted to know more than anything else. And I saw this lady as an opportunity. She was close to God. She was a pastor's wife. The only thing that she said was God has his reasons for everything. I was so angry at that point. This woman was closer to God than anybody I knew, and she didn't have the answers. I pretty much made the decision right there that God didn't exist. I graduated from high school. I ended up going to Duke for my first year of college. I experienced a new level of freedom that I never had. Eventually, I started hanging out with a more partying crowd, and I started drinking, and then I started drinking heavily and often. Then I started doing drugs. It didn't take long until pretty much every day I was waking up late in the afternoon, and my first meal of the day would be dinner, and then I would start doing everything all over again. I would start drinking, start getting high, and I'd normally pass out sometime in mid-morning, and then do that pretty much every day. Needless to say, I failed out. I ended up wasting $40,000 of my parents' money. I got back home. It didn't take long for my parents to find out that I had failed out. They kicked me out, and I started bouncing around with friends. And these friends were like the friends I had at Duke. After several months, I couldn't take it anymore. I was feeling really depressed. I felt like I didn't have a purpose in my life. All my friends that I graduated with were still in college and well on their way. They had their lives lined up, and I was working in a grocery store bagging groceries. I was supposed to have some life, and I wasn't living it. And I really felt like I didn't belong on this earth anymore, that I had no one and nothing. And I just wanted to die. I told my parents, and they checked me into rehab. A year later, I started back at college. I was at UNCC now. I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody. I was starting off brand new, 2 years behind where all of my other friends were. I ended up hanging out with the people I went to orientation with that I had met who had similar classes that I did. And unbeknownst to me, they were faithful Christians. There were many times we would sit in the cafeteria and over lunch and they would challenge my beliefs, and I would challenge theirs. We would have long debates, sometimes heated, about God and Jesus and who God was and who was going to heaven and all sorts of stuff. Later, I found out that they were actually strategizing against me, to witness towards me. And they would have prayer meetings. And that just amazed me when I found out. I didn't think that I was worth that much to anybody, but these people thought I was worth something. And that just made me feel amazing. But later that year, they broke down my defenses, and I started going to church with one of them. You know, her father was the pastor at that church, and he was able to answer a bunch of my questions like I had never gotten answers for before. And so Christmas Eve of that year, 11 o'clock, I called her up and I said, you know, I'm ready to give my life to Christ. And I did. And I accepted Jesus into my life. I met Lori in college, and she encouraged me to go to church on a regular basis. Being relatively new to church, the experience, a lot of things were odd to me. One of the things I guess that confused me or I didn't understand was the offering plate. It got passed every week, and the pastor always said, it's like, it's time for offering, and we'd have a little song that was sung to us, have a soloist up there with a backing track, and the collection plate would be passed. And some people would put money in, some people would just pass it. I would always just pass it. I thought it was exactly what the pastor said, an offering. So I didn't feel like offering, so I didn't. And it wasn't until he gave a sermon on tithing and stewardship that I actually realized what the whole deal was about. I didn't know that a tithe was supposed to be 1/10 of my income. So I started tithing out of obedience more than anything else. I felt that if I was going to be a Christian, I was going to follow God, that I needed to follow wholeheartedly. That if I was disobedient in this area that I was supposed to, required to be obedient in, that I wouldn't be ready to hear God's call for my life in any other area, that I couldn't be available, that God wouldn't be able to use me. And I really decided at that point, because I was trying to pursue God, because I was trying to become a better person, and because I just wanted to be pleasing to God, that I decided to do that. It wasn't much at first because I was a broke college student, but I started. One thing that strikes me about people not tithing is that maybe they don't understand that everything our church does now depends on money. I'm sure there's tons of ministry opportunities that have been lost on the fact that people at our church don't give. And it was something that weighs on me constantly, but how do you bring that up? How do you ask a person, like, do you tithe? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Are you supporting our church? We don't have a church office. We borrow a facility to have band practice. We don't have a building. It's not that God's not blessing us. It's maybe not all of us are obedient. I'm Jonathan Jackson, and this is my Kinetic.